My life for 69 years had been a study in quiet predictability. Each morning began at 6, heralded by the familiar gurgle of the coffee maker and the weight of the same chipped mug I'd used for 2 decades. From my kitchen window, I'd water the African violets, their purple blossoms a living tribute to my late husband, Arthur, who had loved them so. It was a simple existence, stitched together with small, comforting rituals. For 45 of those years, my life's central purpose was my daughter, Dawn. I was the mother who worked nights cleaning offices, whose hands smelled of bleach and floor wax so hers could smell of library books and ambition. I sacrificed sleep, comfort, and dreams so she could attend college and build a life I had only ever imagined. When she married Dave, a man whose ambition was a cold, sharp thing, I bit back my misgivings. He walked into my home with the unearned confidence of a conqueror, slumping into Arthur's armchair as if it were a throne. I swallowed my pride, setting the table for Sunday dinner each week, forcing a smile that never quite reached my eyes. I thought foolishly that after Arthur's passing, Dawn and I would grow closer, two halves of a whole bound by shared grief. Instead, she began to see me as a relic, a problem to be managed. Her visits grew shorter, her calls more perfunctory, her excuses for absence more elaborate. The moment my world fractured came on a gray, drizzling Thursday in October. I had spent the entire day making her favorite chicken and dumplings, the aroma filling the house with a ghost of happier times. I used the good tablecloth, the one embroidered with tiny flowers I'd stitched, while she did her homework as a teenager. When they arrived, the chill of the autumn air seemed to follow them inside. Dawn wore a dress I'd bought her, but her face was a mask of strained politeness. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. She sat perched on the edge of a chair, ready for flight. Dave remained standing, his eyes sweeping across the room, not with nostalgia, but with the cold calculation of an appraiser. "Dave and I have made a decision," she continued. "This house, it's just too much for you now. We're worried about your safety." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it stole the air from my lungs. "We've found a wonderful retirement community. It has activities, gardens, and 24-hour nursing staff. You'll be safer there." The floor seemed to drop away. This was the house where she took her first steps, where every wall was a scrapbook of our lives, where her father had died holding my hand. "But Dawn, this is our home," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not in the walls," she recited, a line that sounded rehearsed, a platitude to soothe a child. Then Dave delivered the final blow. "And it works out perfectly," he said with a satisfied smirk. "Dawn and I need a bigger place, especially with a baby on the way. We'll take over the house." The words didn't register at first. A baby? My own daughter was pregnant, and this was how I was learning of it, as a justification for my eviction. They weren't selling the house, they were seizing it. It was a coup, disguised as concern. My own child was casting me out, rendering me homeless to install herself and that odious man in the home Arthur and I had built. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give them the satisfaction. A strange coldness washed over me, a chilling clarity. The grief that had threatened to drown me began to crystallize into something hard and sharp. This was not a negotiation. It was a declaration of war. "I need some time to think," I said, my voice steady despite the quake in my soul. They left my untouched dinner cooling on the table. That night, I didn't cry. I sat in Arthur's armchair in the dark, the rage a slow rising tide. They thought I was a weak, forgetful old woman. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next morning, I began to move with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a general planning a campaign. When Dawn arrived alone, armed with cardboard boxes and a false, pitying smile, I played my part. "Mom, I came to help you pack," she announced, her voice the robotic monotone she now used with me. I nodded meekly, allowing her to bustle through my home, a stranger sorting through the artifacts of my life. I watched as she carelessly tossed photo albums into a box, my husband's books into another. The final unforgivable act came when she found my small jewelry box. Inside lay my wedding ring, the pearl earrings Arthur gave me for our 20th anniversary, and a delicate gold chain from my own mother. "This will be safer in a bank vault," she said, slipping the entire box into her purse. "Things can get lost at the community." The audacity of it was breathtaking. She was robbing me in plain sight, and I let her. I needed her to believe she had won. The moment her car disappeared down the street, my retreat was over. I went directly to Arthur's old desk in the spare room. He had been a meticulous man, a keeper of records and secrets. In the back of a deep drawer, behind files of old tax returns, was a small, locked folder marked only with his initials. My fingers trembled as I searched his usual hiding spots for the key, finally finding it tucked inside an old book on property investment. What I found inside didn't just change my situation, it changed my entire reality. The folder contained a will I had never seen, drafted just 6 months before Arthur's death. Document after document revealed the truth. My husband, the modest man I thought I knew, had been a silent, brilliant investor. For decades, he had quietly funneled every spare dollar into stocks and real estate. He had built a financial empire I never knew existed, and the will stated unequivocally that I was the sole heir to all of it. Dawn was to receive a small stipend, but only if she had cared for me with love and respect in my final years. The most stunning revelation was a deed that made my breath catch in my throat. Arthur owned the entire apartment building where Dawn and Dave lived. For 2 years, the rent they thought they were paying to a management company had been flowing directly into a trust account in my name. I found the bank statements, my eyes blurring, as I stared at a balance so vast it seemed unreal. He also owned a significant stake in the company where Dave worked, enough to influence board decisions. At the very bottom was a handwritten letter addressed to me. "My dearest Mave," it began. "Forgive my secrecy, but I never fully trusted Dave. I saw an ambition in him that worried me. I built this for you, to protect you. If Dawn ever treats you badly, you now have all the power to defend yourself. Use it wisely, my love. Not to hurt, but to teach." Arthur had seen it all coming. He had armed me from beyond the grave. My tears were not of sorrow, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. The next day, I didn't call the family lawyer. I called the most formidable corporate attorney in the city, a woman named Victoria whose reputation was legendary. I laid out the documents on her vast mahogany desk. She examined them with a sharp, intelligent gaze. "Mrs. Mave," she said finally, a slow smile spreading across her face, "it seems you're in a position of considerable strength. What would you like to do first?" I spent the rest of the week fortifying my position, creating new accounts and moving assets, all while pretending to sort through old clothes for donation. The war had begun, and my enemy had no idea I was already in their fortress. A week later, the first tremor of my counteroffensive reached them. Dave's monthly rent payment was declined. He called the management company only to be informed that the property had a new administrator and that all inquiries should be directed to the law offices of Victoria Vance. Panicked, he and Dawn appeared at my doorstep, their faces a mixture of confusion and irritation. I met them at the door, calm and placid, sipping a cup of tea. "Mom, what's going on?" "The movers are scheduled for Monday," Dawn said, the impatience sharp in her voice. "I've decided not to leave," I replied simply. Dave stepped forward, his posture aggressive. "We've been through this. You're not in a condition to make these decisions. It's not your choice anymore." "On the contrary, Dave," I said, looking him directly in the eye, "I believe it's you who doesn't understand the situation." Their confusion was a small, satisfying pleasure. They left in a huff, muttering about getting their lawyer involved. The next phase of their attack was more insidious. Dawn began calling at all hours, her voice laced with feigned concern. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm just worried. Last week you forgot you left the gas stove on. It was a complete fabrication, a carefully planted seed of doubt." A few days later, a social worker appeared at my door citing an anonymous tip about an elderly woman living alone in unsafe conditions and showing signs of memory loss. I politely answered her questions and showed her around my immaculate home. She left looking apologetic and confused. They were building a narrative brick by insidious brick to prove I was incompetent. They were trying to take my home, and when that failed, they decided to try and take my mind. The final escalation came 2 weeks later. I was served with official court documents. My hands were perfectly steady as I read the petition they had filed. They were suing for an emergency conservatorship. The document was a masterpiece of fiction, detailing my supposed senility, my paranoia, and my inability to manage my own affairs. They claimed I was a danger to myself, and that they, as my only family, needed to step in to protect me and my assets. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. My own daughter was attempting to have me legally declared incompetent, a non-person, to steal what was rightfully mine. They thought they were cornering a helpless animal. They didn't realize they were trying to cage a lioness who now owned the entire jungle. I immediately called Victoria. "They've done it," I said, my voice cold as steel. "They've filed for conservatorship." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then I heard a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "Oh, Mave," she said, her voice rich with amusement. "They have no idea what's about to happen to them, do they?" The court date was set. They had chosen their battlefield. Now I would choose the weapons. When I walked into the courtroom, my daughter Dawn flinched, refusing to meet my eyes. Dave sat beside her, puffed up with a belligerent confidence that I was about to systematically dismantle. His lawyer began, painting a picture of me as a confused, vindictive old woman, manipulated by a predatory attorney into turning against her loving family. He spoke of my erratic behavior and delusions of wealth, portraying their petition as a painful but necessary act of love. When it was Victoria's turn, she stood with an elegant, lethal calm. She didn't just refute their claims. She annihilated them. She presented the deed to their apartment building. She presented the bank statements showing 2 years of their rent payments flowing into my account. She presented share certificates proving my controlling interest in Dave's company. With each document, a visible wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. Dave's face went from ruddy confidence to a sickly pale white, but the decisive blow came from the bench itself. The judge had been observing me with a strange, intense look throughout the proceedings. Finally, he leaned forward. "Mrs. Mave Williams?" he asked, his voice filled with a curious disbelief. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. He took off his glasses, a slow, dawning recognition on his face. "You were a secretary for Judge Miller 30 years ago at the family court, weren't you?" My heart skipped a beat. "You were always kind to me when I was just a terrified intern. You taught me how to organize files and brought me coffee when I worked late. You told me I'd be a great judge one day when no one else thought I could." The courtroom was utterly silent. "I am Judge David Morales," he said, a small, kind smile touching his lips. "I never forgot you." Dave's lawyer shot to his feet, sputtering about a conflict of interest, but Judge Morales silenced him with a wave of his hand. "There is no conflict," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "There is only the truth. And after reviewing this evidence, it is clear that the only manipulation and abuse in this family has been directed at Mrs. Williams, not from her." The verdict was absolute. Their petition was dismissed with prejudice. Dave was ordered to pay all legal fees and was hit with a restraining order prohibiting him from contacting me or Dawn. His life, as he knew it, was over. In the aftermath, Dawn left him. Pregnant and humbled, she came to me, not asking for a home, but for forgiveness. The road back was long and quiet, paved with small acts of repentance on her part and cautious observation on mine. 6 months later, my granddaughter, Serenity, was born, and her arrival was the dawn after a long, dark night. The years that followed were a gift. Dawn rediscovered the strong, kind woman she was meant to be. My relationship with her was rebuilt, stronger now because it was founded on truth and mutual respect. I never used my power for revenge. Instead, inspired by Arthur's letter, I used it to teach. I established the Home and Dignity Foundation, a refuge for elderly individuals facing familial abuse and financial exploitation. My pain had been transformed into purpose. 5 years after that day in court, I sat on my porch, watching Serenity chase butterflies in the garden. The African violets were in full bloom. Dawn came out and handed me a letter, an invitation from Judge Morales to accept an award for the foundation's work. Looking at my daughter's happy face and my granddaughter's innocent joy, I realized I had won something far more valuable than a court case. I had taken back my life, reclaimed my daughter, and built a legacy of strength. I had found my happy ending, not in wealth or power, but in the quiet, unshakable peace of knowing I had fought for my dignity and won.